This week, the sky does something it hasn't done in 36 years. Not one event, not two, but five separate celestial turning points arriving inside 5 consecutive days. A dark moon window, a triple planetary alignment, the final new moon of the astrological year, the spring equinox, and the sun stepping into Aries, returning the zodiac to its very first degree. Each one of those carries weight on its own. Stacked this closely together, they create something that the people who pay attention to timing will recognize immediately. Most won't notice what's actually happening this week, not because the signs aren't there, but because the most significant part of all of this isn't the events themselves, it's what's sitting underneath them. And that's exactly what this is about. The week starts with something most people won't even register, because it's defined not by what appears in the sky, but by what disappears. Right now, as March 16th moves into March 17th, the moon is entering its darkest phase, the period just before the new moon, when the lunar light fades so completely that the moon becomes invisible from Earth. Astronomers call it the dark moon phase. And for most people who glance at the night sky during these days, they simply see nothing. But across many ancient traditions, from Mesopotamia to the early Celtic calendar to indigenous lunar systems worldwide, this invisible phase wasn't considered empty or insignificant. It was actually regarded as the most potent window of the entire lunar cycle, precisely because the previous cycle had already dissolved, while the next one hadn't yet taken form. The old energy was spent. The new energy hadn't arrived. And in that gap, in that in-between space, something rare became possible. Think of it like the pause at the very bottom of a breath. After you've exhaled completely, before the next inhale begins, there's a brief moment where the body holds no direction. That pause isn't passive. It's the moment of complete release. And it's also the moment when the breath can begin again with full capacity. The dark moon carries that same quality. It's the pause between cycles, and the decisions, intentions, and realizations that form during this window tend to carry an unusual clarity, because they're not weighted down by leftover momentum from the previous month. There's another layer to this particular dark moon that adds something significant. Right now, 7 celestial bodies are positioned in water signs, a rare concentration that astrologers and researchers at Moon Omens have noted as producing heightened sensitivity to intuition and inner knowing. Dreams become more vivid. Symbols arrive more frequently. The kind of understanding that operates through feeling rather than logic tends to sharpen during periods like this. That means the quiet of the dark moon window isn't just empty space. It's a space where perception itself runs deeper than usual. What makes this particular dark moon different from others, and this is the part worth staying with, is what it's sitting directly on top of. Something is present in this week's sky that only comes around once in approximately 36 years. We'll come back to exactly what that is and why it matters, because it reframes the entire meaning of this new moon. But first, something is happening in the pre-dawn sky on March 17th that sets up everything else coming later in the week. On the morning of March 17th, if you step outside before sunrise and look toward the eastern horizon, you'll find something worth seeing. A slender crescent moon is visible near both Mercury and Mars in the twilight sky. 3 celestial bodies, the Moon, Mercury, and Mars, appearing close together in the same region of the pre-dawn sky. This alignment has been confirmed for March 17th, and while it's a beautiful visual moment, the meaning behind it runs a little deeper than the view itself. In the language of astrology, each of these three bodies represents a distinct force in the inner life of a person. Mercury governs the way the mind moves, communication, thought patterns, the way ideas take shape and flow between people. Mars governs energy and forward drive, the force that takes a thought and converts it into action, the part of a person that decides to move rather than wait. The moon governs instinct and emotional response, the part of you that reacts before the mind has finished processing, the internal compass that operates on feeling rather than reason. In the rhythm of ordinary days, these three forces often work at different speeds and in different directions. The mind sees something clearly, but the energy isn't there to act on it. The drive is present, but the instinct hasn't confirmed the direction yet. Clarity and courage rarely arrive at the same time, and that misalignment is behind more stalled decisions and delayed conversations than most people realize. When Mercury and Mars come close together, and the moon moves through the same space, it creates a brief window where those gaps narrow. The mind, the drive, and the instinct briefly operate in closer alignment than usual. Something that felt complicated starts to feel workable. A step that seemed premature starts to feel timed correctly. A conversation that kept getting postponed starts to feel ready. This alignment doesn't force anything, but it does create conditions where moving forward feels more natural than staying still. There's one more dimension to this alignment that becomes important later in the week. Mercury, right now, is in a specific stage of its cycle, and what it's about to shift into will add a particular weight to every conversation and decision that forms during these days. That part arrives once we reach March 20th. On March 18th at 9:23 p.m. Eastern Time, which translates to March 19th at 1:23 UTC, the new moon in Pisces arrives. The sun and moon meet at 28 degrees and 26 minutes of Pisces. That specific degree is worth pausing on because it tells you something important about the nature of this particular new moon. The zodiac wheel spans 360 degrees. Pisces is the 12th and final sign. The new moon at 28 degrees 26 minutes of Pisces means the sun and moon are meeting at a point just barely over 1 degree away from the absolute end of the entire zodiac. This isn't a new moon arriving in the middle of a cycle. This is a new moon arriving at the closing edge, the final page, practically speaking, of the astrological year. Every new moon carries the energy of a reset, a moment where the lunar cycle begins again from nothing. But a new moon at this degree in Pisces does something more than reset the monthly cycle. It closes the annual one. Pisces itself is the sign of completion, release, and the dissolution of what no longer fits. It rules the unseen dimensions of experience, dreams, intuition, the things we sense before we can name them. A new moon here doesn't push you toward aggressive goals or visible outcomes. It asks you to clear the space, to release what the previous cycle left behind, to make room for what the next one is about to bring. There's also something else worth noting about this particular new moon. It's the first one since the blood moon eclipse closed its window, meaning the intense, disruptive energy of the eclipse season is now behind us. The past several weeks carried a quality of upheaval and forced movement that many people felt strongly. This new moon marks the return to a quieter, more intentional rhythm. The clearing that eclipse season demanded is done. What comes next is yours to choose with more awareness. But the thing that truly sets this new moon apart from any other in recent years, and this connects directly to what was raised earlier about the dark moon phase, is what else is present in the sky at this exact moment. What's waiting at the end of that thread is a planetary alignment that only forms once every 36 years. And it's forming right now at this new moon in this week. At the time of this new moon, the Sun and Moon in late Pisces are conjunct two major planets simultaneously, Neptune and Saturn. Neptune has been moving through the final degrees of Pisces for some time. Saturn recently entered the early degrees of Aries, and what has just occurred between them is one of the rarer events in the slow-moving outer solar system. Saturn and Neptune have completed their conjunction, and Saturn is now separating from Neptune, which means the two planets have entered what astrologers call their new phase, the opening of a completely new Saturn-Neptune cycle. This cycle lasts approximately 36 years. The last time this began was in 1989. The one before that was 1952. These cycles don't come around within a single lifetime more than a small number of times, and each new cycle shifts how the relationship between structure and vision plays out, both for the collective and for individuals. Saturn is the planet of reality. It rules what is built with patience over time, discipline, sustained effort, long-term work, and the structures that hold precisely because they were built on something solid. Neptune is the planet of vision and spirit. It rules imagination, deep intuition, and the capacity to sense something true before it has yet taken a visible form. When these two planets begin a new joint cycle, the question that opens for the years ahead is a very specific one. How much of what you believe will you actually build? Not in a dramatic way, not overnight. But the invitation of this 36-year opening is to stop keeping the vision separate from the effort, to stop treating the dream as a thing that lives only in the quiet spaces of the inner life, waiting for a time when conditions feel safer or clearer or more certain. Saturn and Neptune beginning together are asking the people paying attention during this window to begin grounding something real, not because the timing will ever feel perfect, but because the cycle itself has just opened, and the first steps taken inside a new 36-year chapter tend to carry unusual weight. This is the layer underneath the surface of this week, not just a new moon and an equinox. A 36-year planetary chapter opening its very first page. On March 20th, Mercury ends its retrograde. Mercury has been moving backward through Pisces for the past several weeks, and in practical terms, that tends to create the sensation that communication is delayed, decisions feel harder to finalize, and something important keeps needing one more pass before it can actually move forward. That slightly circular quality of effort that the retrograde produces, the sense that things are taking longer than they should, lifts on March 20th. What makes Mercury's direct station this time around particularly striking is where Mercury is standing when it makes that turn. At the moment Mercury resumes forward motion, it is conjunct the North Node, the point in the sky that astrologers have referred to as the destiny axis for centuries. The North Node represents the direction of growth, the path a life is meant to move toward, the trajectory of what's genuinely ahead rather than what's being revisited or completed. Mercury sitting directly on this point while shifting from retrograde to direct creates a very specific quality in the conversations and decisions forming around March 20th. Things that were genuinely not ready to be resolved, conversations that kept circling without landing, decisions that kept demanding more time, may find their footing now. The clarity that was building through the retrograde period, through the reviewing and the reconsidering, now has a direction to move in. Mercury on the North Node suggests that what finally crystallizes during this window isn't just useful in an ordinary way. It carries forward motion in it. It belongs to what's next, not to what was. The practical experience of this might feel quiet. Not a single dramatic revelation, not a complete overhaul in one moment, but more like a conversation that finally reaches its real conclusion, or a decision that stops asking questions of itself and simply settles. Something that needed to wait finally stops waiting. At 14:46 UTC on March 20th, that's 10:46 in the morning for those in the Eastern Time Zone, the sun crosses the celestial equator, moving from south to north. That precise crossing is the Spring Equinox. At that exact moment, the Earth's axial tilt reaches a position where it is aligned neither toward nor away from the sun, which produces something remarkable. Every location on Earth simultaneously receives nearly equal amounts of daylight and darkness. The sun rises due east and sets due west, everywhere on the planet at once. This has been confirmed by Earth Sky, the Farmer's Almanac, Time and Date, and Live Science, all pointing to the same moment on March 20th. The word equinox comes directly from Latin. Equus means equal, and nox means night. The name describes precisely what happens, a moment of symmetry between light and dark, a brief point of balance before the balance tips again. What follows the equinox is where its true meaning lives. Once that precise crossing happens, daylight in the northern hemisphere begins growing longer with every day that passes. Mornings arrive earlier, evenings stretch further. The natural world, which had been in a state of conservation through the colder months, begins accelerating toward growth and movement. Ancient civilizations across multiple continents built their most important structures around this exact moment. Stonehenge aligns with the equinox sunrise. So does Chichen Itza. The ancient Egyptian temples at Karnak were constructed to mark this transition. For thousands of years, across dozens of unconnected cultures, this was the moment that told the world it was ready to begin again. Not because someone declared it so, but because the sky itself demonstrated it every single year with the return of the light. The equinox on its own carries genuine weight. But the equinox isn't the most significant thing happening at that specific instant on March 20th. Something else arrives at exactly the same moment, something that astrologers and historians have long regarded as the true marker of the new year. And that's where everything this week has been building toward finally locks into place. At 10:46 a.m. Eastern Time on March 20th, the exact same moment the equinox arrives, the sun steps into Aries. 0 degrees, the first degree of the zodiac wheel. The astrological new year begins at precisely the same instant as the astronomical new season, just as it was designed to do thousands of years ago when these calendars were first built. This synchronization is not a coincidence. It's the foundation. For much of human history, January 1st was not the beginning of the year. That date was a later administrative creation tied to Roman politics rather than to any natural cycle. The real new year, in ancient Rome before the calendar reform, in Persian tradition, in the Vedic system, and across many cultures that built their timekeeping around the sky, was marked by the sun's return to Aries, coinciding with the equinox, coinciding with the return of light's growth in the northern hemisphere. The sky was the only calendar that mattered, and the sky said, the year began here. Aries is the first sign for reasons that run deeper than position in a list. It represents initiative and the willingness to begin before the outcome is certain. It is the energy of something starting from nothing, the force of a person who takes the first step, not because all uncertainty has been removed, but because they've decided that moving is worth more than waiting. When the sun moves into Aries, that quality enters the collective atmosphere. Things that were waiting tend to find their start. The pull towards beginning tends to outweigh the pull toward holding back. Now hold all of this together and see what the week actually contains. A dark moon window opens on March 16th, with 7 planets concentrated in water signs, sharpening intuition during the quietest part of the lunar cycle. A triple conjunction on the morning of March 17th briefly places the Moon, Mercury, and Mars in the same region of the pre-dawn sky, creating a window where the mind, the drive, and the instinct narrow their usual gap. The final new moon of the astrological year arrives on March 18th at 28 degrees of Pisces, sitting directly on a brand new Saturn-Neptune cycle that won't open again for another 36 years. Mercury ends its retrograde on March 20th, standing on the North Node, giving long-delayed conversations and decisions a direction to finally move in. The Spring Equinox arrives at 1446 UTC, tipping the Earth toward light and growth. And at that same instant, the Sun crosses into Aries and the zodiac wheel returns to its first degree. Every one of these things happens inside 5 days. There's a tendency to expect that weeks carrying real significance will announce themselves in some visible way, that the days that matter most will feel different from the ones surrounding them, that a turning point will carry some obvious signal of its importance while it's unfolding. It rarely works that way. The weeks that leave the deepest impression on the months that follow tend to feel, in the moment, like ordinary time. Conversations happen. Small choices get made. An idea surfaces and gets noted somewhere. A direction becomes slightly clearer than it was 7 days before. None of it seems to match the scale of what was quietly set in motion. And it's usually only later, months down the line, that a person looks back and recognizes that something genuinely shifted during that particular stretch of days. Pay attention to what surfaces over the next few days. Pay attention to the thought that arrives unexpectedly in a quiet moment. Pay attention to the conversation that finally says what it had been circling around for weeks. Pay attention to the direction that starts to feel less uncertain than it did before. These things tend to arrive without announcement. They show up softly in the middle of ordinary days, and they carry more weight than they appear to carry in the moment they arrive. This week, the sky is doing something it won't do again for a long time. Multiple cycles are turning their page at once, and whether that shows up as something you notice immediately or something that only makes sense when you look back, you're standing at a genuine beginning. That's worth something. It's worth showing up with your full attention.